Well, hello, water class. This is going to be the last talk that I give this semester and record and put on YouTube and all that stuff. Um, it's going to be a little bit of a rambling, kind of covering a few things that I want to cover in no certain order. So be prepared for that. I just want to follow up on a couple of things on the water rights module and the climate change module, and then leave you with a couple of ideas and resources for future interest. For one thing I want to cover here is the water rights. Some folks have done that extra credit work of adding up all the allocations along the American River and comparing that to some measurement of the current flow or average flow of the American River. And if you do that, you might find that there are more water rights allocated than is present in the river. That's not a mistake. And so I uploaded an article in the introduction for the water rights module that you might be interested in. It's a study done by UC Davis in 2014 called 100 Years of Water Rights Allocation in California. And in there, they explain the process of how water rights are allocated and what's happened, and some kind of glitches or flaws in the system that allow for this outcome where we have more water rights allocated than are present. They talk about how it works and all that. It's a very good article, and the State Water Board recognizes this. I want to show again. This is just sort of extra texture to the assignment here, but they did a lot of work in this study, and they assembled the database, and they made this illustration. And what I'm going to do is show you this thing. It shows you the history of water rights allocation in California from 1900 to the present. And you can see the black dots are, let's see if I can pause this. The black dots are points of diversion, and then the color code is the percent of runoff. So that's the flow available is runoff. How much percentage of that is allocated? So blue is 0%. So you've got these rivers up here in the north with lots and lots of water in 1965. 0% is allocated. But already by 1965, what do you know? These key drainages off the Sierra Nevada are already over allocated in 1965. And again, the article goes into why that is the case. But suffice it to say, there's a person that works at Placer County Water Agency down the street. That's the agency that provides water for Placer County. And I did that talk on their intake in the American River. And he indicated to me that, look, in the real world, if you have a water right, it's really what he would call a license to hunt. In that this idea that we have in California that water is to be put to its best beneficial use is taken seriously. So even if you have an appropriative water right after 1914, that's not a guarantee that you're going to get that. You have to defend it because people will come after it and say, hey, I can use that water for better purpose. But anyway, here we are in 1965 already. A lot of the water has been over allocated by that time, according to the study. Here's 1970. More and more rights allocated over time until you get to the point where they estimate, and this is again just one study, but they estimate that about 5 times the amount of available water has been allocated. So that's kind of an interesting little factoid to think about. The other thing I wanted to discuss is the climate change module. Again, this is, as always, difficult to do remotely. This is a real important module, obviously, or a concept. And these lectures that I've selected are very deliberate. I want you to pay close attention to them. You'll learn a lot. This first one by Lynn Ingram, she wrote a book called The West Without Water, is a fascinating lecture. I mean, it's not very exciting the way it's delivered, but there's just a tremendous amount of information. And I think the take home there is that, there's strong evidence for long periods of significant drought in the state, and regardless of the influence of climate change. And so it's really interesting to take a look at that. And some folks are looking at the current climate situation and saying, hey, we may be going into another mega drought. And what that would mean is 50 to 70% precipitation of normal looking forward. That's the bad news. But again, the good news is this last lecture, and I needed to hear it about 3 or 4 times for it to think through my skull. But what he talks about is, reasons for optimism managing water in California. And, agriculture comes under scrutiny there because, again, agriculture is using about 80% of the water that we capture. And so he really kind of drills into what ag is doing with that water and what our options are moving forward. We have a very good water system. We have water 1.0 down really well in this state. So there's a lot of options that we have. Lastly, I included this chart here to illustrate kind of the nuts and bolts of what our challenge is for managing water going forward. This is another way of looking at it. So this chart here, this is out of the California Strategic Plan from the Department of Water Resources. It talks about a typical year from fall, winter, spring, summer, fall. And, the blue line is the runoff curve, where the water's coming off the mountain. It peaks around early spring, but our demand peak is in summer. So when it's hot and we want to irrigate, that's when we want the water. We get the water in late spring, so we have to bridge this gap between water supply and water demand. And we use dams and storage, hopefully snowpack, if we can, to manage this gap. Well, going forward, the thinking is, regardless, the climate is going to be warming. That's the predictions. That doesn't mean that it'll rain less or more necessarily, but it will mean we have less snowpack. And so what the concept is, if we cruise down to the future from the current, the demand stays pretty much at the same spot in the year, early summer, peak demand for irrigation. But what's changing here is that the peak of supply, instead of being here almost in late winter, it's going to come in earlier in winter. So the gap between when we have our peak runoff and when we have our peak demand widens. And so that is kind of in a nutshell what water managers are looking at. How do we bridge this gap between earlier water being available, that is as rain and not so much snow pack, and how do we bridge the gap between that water being available to when we need it? And this is where we get maybe more storage facilities like the Sites Reservoir. Maybe we're using groundwater banking more. And other options. So I just wanted to kind of get that point across. What else before I say sayonara to y'all? I put a module in here called Parting Shots, and what I want to do with that, let's see if I can find the modules again here. Sorry. Modules. The last module here, I just have a few resources that I want to discuss with you briefly here. There's a couple of blogs going forward. If you're interested in kind of keeping track of California water and what's going on in the world of water, there's 2 resources. One is called Maven's Notebook, and there's a link to that in the Parting Shots. It's just a blog that has been around for quite a long time, and I don't know how Chris Maven does it, but daily, she's won awards for this in the world of journalism. Here's December 13th, talking about the current water that we're getting, the current rainfall we're getting. But there's just a tremendous amount of water resources on this site. So not only is it like current events, but you can go to resource pages and find all kinds of things. So this is sort of the place that one should start if they want to kind of refresh on water and what's going on with California water. Number one, Maven's Notebook. Number two is the California Water blog. It's called California Water Blog, and it's put on by the UC Davis Ecosystem Group, UC Davis Center for Watershed Sciences. So California Water Blog, one word, UC Davis Center for Water Resources. They have been blogging for a long time. They have issues going back to 2011. They, because they're UC Davis, tend to get into a little more detail on issues. But again, it's if you're wondering about a water issue, I would start with these two resources to see what they say, and then maybe you can you're off to a good start to get a good picture of what's really going on. And then finally, and I didn't assign this as a required reading or whatever because it's a little, I think you've got enough assignments, especially in this remote format. But in the last module, there's a very interesting article, and it's very new, November 2020. I'm pulling it up here, I hope, called Priorities for California Water. It's done by the Public Policy Institute of California. They're not academic, but they're also not private sector. They're a nonprofit, kind of a think tank group. They do a lot of work on all kinds of issues in California, anywhere from prison reform to disadvantaged community status to, but they have a strong water group. And they've gone through, they're very respected. People agree with them on this kind of stuff. And so again, this is just a way, if you wanted to leave the class with some kind of picture of what the priorities are going forward and what California Water is doing. It's a short read, 15 pages, but it talks about, the major issues that California faces that are related to water. Safe and affordable water, we didn't go into that much. That's a giant deal. There's estimated 1 million Californians that are ingesting water that's technically not safe to drink. And that has to do with where they are in the state and, frankly, their disadvantaged economic status. No way of getting around that. So this kind of covers that in a few pages. And wildfire risk, and what does that have to do with water, ecosystems, and then this most important part, priorities for water resilient California. Just a very, again, if you kind of wanted to refresh yourself on major issues in water in California, this would be a great go-to resource to have in your file for California water if you're keeping that. So other than that, that's really what I wanted to say. I hope that you've learned something about California water and water in general in this class. And again, I wanted to leave the class without a final. I think we've had a couple of midterms, and looking back at the class here, I think there's been quite a few assignments. So I left you with just doing some assignments in Module 14. And really, like I said, I can't emphasize enough that this last talk is only 5 minutes, but I don't like to do this normally, but one of the questions there that's worth a lot of points is basically just to, regurgitate what this person says, because I do think it's that important and current and relevant. So, hey, as always, if you want to get a hold of me, always looking at my emails, and happy to chat with any of you about the class or anything else. So good luck finishing the semester, and maybe we'll cross paths in the future.